Red Creek County, a purely agricultural region in southeastern Ohio, was steeped in the peaceful, slow rhythm of rural life. Away from the hustle and bustle of big cities, people here lived by their cornfields, small gardens, and the bounty that nature generously provided. For old Arthur Miller, a farmer who had spent nearly all of his 60 years in the small township of Van Tun, the sweltering heat of early June 2024 was a familiar sign. It signaled that crawfish season had arrived. For him, nothing compared to a bowl of rich crawfish etouffee, a taste of home, a blend of savory spice and the sweat of the land. On the afternoon of June 14, 2024, as the last rays of sun began to fade, Mr. Miller grabbed his wire trap and a bucket and ambled out towards Gravel Run Field. This vast field lay adjacent to an old village cemetery, where the earthen graves had been worn down by time, leaving only undulating mounds overgrown with weeds. The locals, especially the children, rarely ventured here at dusk, spooked by ghost stories passed down through generations. But Mr. Miller was different. He was all too familiar with this place. To him, the dead were at peace. There was nothing to fear from them, certainly nothing as frightening as hunger and poverty. He followed the edge of an irrigation ditch, his eyes expertly scanning every patch of grass, every undercut bank. Decades of trapping had given him a special ability to spot the hidden burrows of crawfish, even the smallest ones. After about half an hour, his bucket held a respectable dozen fat crawfish. The old man smiled to himself, thinking he'd have a fine dinner for his family tonight. As he approached a long-abandoned section of the field where the grass grew knee-high, his eyes fell upon a peculiar-looking hole. It was much larger than a typical crawfish burrow, with a perfectly round opening and a fresh mound of excavated mud. He bent down and saw a massive crawfish, its large pincer a brilliant orange, peeking out from the entrance. Seeing him, it quickly retreated deep inside. A real monster, Mr. Miller muttered to himself, thinking he'd struck gold. He carefully set his bucket down, rolled up his sleeves, and slowly reached his hand into the burrow. The hole was unusually deep. The further his hand went, the more he felt the damp, cool breath of the earth. He fumbled in the darkness, his fingers trying to grasp the giant crawfish. Suddenly, his hand touched something that wasn't a crawfish. It was a cluster of small, squirming objects. Mr. Miller immediately recognized it as a nest of them. A jolt of joy ran through him. Tonight wouldn't he just be a simple meal, he'd have enough for a whole crawfish boil for the family. He skillfully pulled them out one by one, dropping them into his bucket. 10, 20, then 30. The more he pulled, the more he felt was still inside. This burrow was a treasure trove. He reached his hand in deeper, almost up to his elbow, determined to get every last one. Abruptly, his fingertips brushed against something round and hard at the very back of the hole. It wasn't a rock, its surface felt smooth, with strange ridges and indentations. Curious, Mr. Miller used his fingers to dig away the surrounding mud and then, with all his strength, pulled the object out. It was heavy and stuck fast in the mud, so he struggled for a while before finally wresting it from the burrow's opening. He hastily wiped off the clinging mud and held it up in the fading twilight to get a better look. And then, a chill shot up his spine like an electric current. His body went rigid, his teeth chattering. There, resting in his calloused palm, was a human skull. Its two empty, black eye sockets seemed to stare into him with a mournful gaze. But the most horrifying part wasn't its shape, it was the patches of soft, decaying tissue still clinging to the cheekbones and jaw, emitting the thick, nauseating stench of death. A terrified scream caught in the old man's throat. He dropped the skull. It rolled into the grass. He scrambled backward, stumbled, and fell, then clumsily got back to his feet. In a state of sheer panic, he abandoned his bucket, letting the dozens of freshly caught crawfish spill out and scatter. He just ran. He ran for his life back towards the village, not daring to look back once. The wind whistling past his ears mingled with the frantic pounding of his heart. Only one thought consumed him: ghosts. This field was right next to the cemetery. Had he accidentally disturbed an unmarked grave? But then, even in his fear, the reason of a man who had lived his whole life on this land began to surface. He knew every inch of this place. The Gravel Run field had never, in his father's or grandfather's time, been used for burials. Besides, if it were an old grave, how could the bones still have flesh on them? The gruesome image flashed in his mind again. No, this wasn't the work of spirits. This was the work of the living. Reaching the edge of the village, Mr. Miller finally dared to stop, panting, the back of his shirt soaked in a cold sweat. He looked back towards the field, where darkness was now falling, cloaking everything in a sinister gloom. The fear was still there, but alongside it was a sense of unease, a nagging feeling that he couldn't just ignore this. After a moment of tormented deliberation, he made a decision. He didn't go home. He walked straight to the Red Creek County Sheriff's Office to report what he had found. Upon receiving a report of such a serious nature, the Red Creek County Sheriff's Office was immediately notified. Less than an hour later, law enforcement, led by the Criminal Investigation Unit, arrived at the scene. The once quiet gravel run field was now filled with the sweeping beams of flashlights and the crackle of police radios. Yellow security tape was stretched out, cordoning off a wide area around the fateful Crawfish Burrow. Detective Frank Miller, the second in command of the Criminal Investigation Unit, a 10-year veteran with a face weathered by the elements, signaled for his team to begin. Under the powerful floodlights, the scene was illuminated as if it were day. The skull lay forlornly in the grass, its dark sockets a silent accusation. A crime scene unit began its meticulous work, photographing, measuring, and collecting every trace of evidence, no matter how small. The victim was likely buried here, Detective Miller concluded after carefully observing the surroundings. The soil at the burrow's entrance shows signs of disturbance, and not from an animal. The killer probably dug a shallow grave. Over time, wild animals like crawfish and crickets burrowed in and inadvertently exposed part of the body. The order to excavate was given. Officers, using specialized shovels, carefully removed thin layers of soil. The atmosphere grew tense, the silence broken only by the scrape of shovels against the earth. After about 40 minutes, more of the body was revealed. It was a human skeleton with a significant amount of soft tissue still attached, in the process of decomposition. The victim was buried in a fetal position, without proper clothing, indicating the killer's hasty disposal. When the body was fully unearthed, the scene became clearer. The victim was wearing a thin, floral print sundress, now stained yellow and tattered from being buried in the damp earth. On her feet, she still wore a pair of nude-colored socks. Based on the structure of the pelvis and skull, a forensic officer at the scene gave a preliminary assessment. Reporting, Detective. The victim is female, estimated age between 20 and 30. Based on the degree of decomposition of the remaining soft tissue, time of death was likely about a year ago. The body hasn't fully decomposed, possibly due to being buried in an anaerobic clay environment. Detective Miller nodded, his eyes fixed thoughtfully on the victim's remains. A young woman, murdered and hidden in this desolate place. Who was she? And who could have committed such a brutal act? A cascade of questions flooded the experienced detective's mind. The on-site examination lasted until nearly midnight. The victim's body was then carefully placed in a specialized bag and transported directly to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation BCI Forensics Lab for more in-depth analysis. The most urgent task now was to identify the victim. A nameless skeleton meant the case would forever be a dead end. That very night, Detective Miller directed a team to review all missing person reports filed in Red Creek County and the surrounding areas over the past year and a half. But the initial results were not promising. No cases matched the victim's description. The investigation seemed to have hit its first wall right at the very beginning. In the days that followed, a sense of urgency and gravity settled over the Red Creek County Sheriff's Office. The case of the nameless skeleton in Gravel Run Field became a top priority, a silent challenge to the experience of every investigator. Detective Miller practically lived at the office. On his desk, files from old cases were pushed aside to make room for a single crime scene photograph, the skull, with its hauntingly empty eye sockets. Being unable to identify the victim was like navigating a pitch-black room with no idea where the light switch was. Every investigative path was a dead end if they didn't know who the young woman was. The team's only hope now rested with the state BCI lab. Detective Miller knew that no matter how cunning a killer might be, the truth was often preserved most faithfully on the victim's own body. And they didn't have to wait long. On the morning of June 19, 2024, the detailed forensic autopsy report arrived. Detective Miller scanned through the complex medical terminology, his eyes landing on the most critical conclusion. The cause of death was determined to be mechanical asphyxiation, most likely by strangulation. This was based on the discovery of microfractures on the hyoid bone in the neck, a small, horseshoe-shaped bone that typically only breaks under direct, forceful external pressure. But another detail in the report caught Detective Miller's particular attention. It was a strange phenomenon that even a veteran investigator like him had only read about in textbooks. The medical examiner had made a detailed note about a rare occurrence: pink teeth. Upon close examination of the victim's dental structure, they found that the dentin of most of her teeth had an unusual pale pink hue, visible to the naked eye through the thin enamel. The forensic report explained that the pink teeth phenomenon, or post-mortem pink teeth, occurs when a person dies during a violent struggle for air. The sudden lack of oxygen and the surge of blood pressure to the head and neck in the final moments of life cause the tiny capillaries inside the tooth pulp to rupture. Blood from these capillaries seeps into the microscopic dentin tubules, staining the dentin pink from the inside. It's a sign that is nearly impossible to fake a victim's silent testimony to the violent and agonizing death they endured. Detective Miller closed the report, his heart heavy. He could almost picture the young woman struggling in desperation, fighting for her life until her very last breath. The killer hadn't just taken her life, they had forced her to experience the most terrifying final moments. The detective's resolve hardened. He vowed to find the perpetrator, whatever it took, and make them pay for their monstrous crime. However, the report also brought some bad news. Since most of the soft tissue on the face had completely decomposed, visual identification was impossible. The last hope of giving the victim back her name was to perform a forensic facial reconstruction from the skull. This was a complex technique requiring a combination of forensic science and artistic sculpting, a time-consuming process that demanded extreme patience. The victim's skull was sent to the BCI's Forensic Art Unit. There, Officer Evelyn Reed, the unit's sole forensic artist and reconstruction expert, took on the challenging task. In her small, quiet studio, Officer Reed began her work. The skull was placed on a stand. Based on analyses of race, age, and gender, she started attaching small rubber markers to points all over the skull surface. Each marker corresponded to a standard thickness of muscle and skin tissue. In total, 21 critical anatomical landmarks were identified. Then, using specialized clay, she slowly began to build up the layers, connecting the landmarks. Her hands moved with a fluid precision. She wasn't just applying clay, it felt as if she were trying to resurrect a life. From a lifeless piece of bone, the shapes of the major muscle groups gradually emerged: the masseter, the orbicularis oris, the zygomaticus. Next came the layer of fat, and finally, the skin. Prosthetic eyes were placed in the sockets. The lips were shaped based on the structure of the jaw and teeth. Hair was added based on a few precious strands found at the crime scene. Detective Miller visited a few times to observe the process. He stood quietly in a corner, watching the victim's face slowly being reborn. From an anonymous white skeleton, a young woman with delicate features, a high-bridged nose, and full lips was gradually taking shape. There was something miraculous, and also heartbreaking, about the process. He felt as if he were looking at a soul trying to return to tell its tragic story. While waiting for the reconstruction to be completed, Detective Miller's team didn't stay idle. They began canvassing the areas surrounding the crime scene. The township of Van Tun and its neighbors, though rural, were located near a large industrial park. As a result, a number of makeshift entertainment venues had sprung up to serve the workers, including many karaoke bars and massage parlors that attracted young women from other areas. Detectives were dispatched in teams to conduct a large-scale canvass. But the work was harder than they anticipated. At every establishment, they were met with a wall of silence. The owners either gave vague answers or claimed they couldn't keep track of their employees. "They come and go, detective," one karaoke bar owner said. "Lots of girls work for a few weeks, then find a place with better pay and leave. Some save up a bit of money and go back home to get married. We just hire them and pay them. How are we supposed to know where they go?" It was the truth. Most of the young women working in these places came from difficult backgrounds, from all over the country. They lived transient lives and rarely shared personal information. Searching for a nameless girl who had disappeared a year ago in such a complex and fluid environment was like looking for a needle in a haystack. After nearly a week of canvassing, the teams returned with a disappointing result: a big, fat zero. Just as the investigation seemed to have hit another dead end, a ray of hope emerged. Officer Reed announced that the facial reconstruction was complete. Detective Miller rushed to the forensic art unit. On the workbench sat the finished clay bust. It depicted the face of a very beautiful young woman, about 25 years old, with large eyes that held a hint of indescribable sadness. The bust was then photographed from multiple angles, and the images were processed by graphic artists to create a lifelike and natural-looking portrait. This time, armed with a powerful identification tool, Detective Miller decided to launch a second, all-out canvas. He had hundreds of copies of the portrait printed, along with a photo of the floral dress she was wearing when she died. He divided the teams and instructed them to go to every bar, every parlor, and patiently show the photos to every single person, from owners and managers to servers and staff. They started all over again. The first place, no recognition. The second, just shakes of the head. The third, fourth, the 10th. The initial hope began to fade into fatigue and frustration. Perhaps this girl wasn't involved in this line of work at all. Perhaps no one remembered her existence. On the afternoon of the third day of the second canvas, as a two-detective team entered a massage parlor called the Relaxation Station at the end of a small street, luck finally smiled on them. The establishment was small, run by a woman in her 50s named Brenda. After looking at the portrait, Brenda initially shook her head. But when the detective showed her the photo of the dress, her eyes narrowed. She took the photo, staring at it for a long moment. "This dress looks so familiar," she murmured. Then she looked back at the portrait, and a spark of recognition lit up in her eyes. "Oh my God! Is that Megan?" "Megan Vance," the detective said, his heart leaping. "You knew this girl, Knew her?" "Of course," Brenda nodded, her voice still filled with disbelief. "She worked for me for almost a year. Pretty girl, quiet, very sweet. But she quit over a year ago. Texted me saying she was going back home, down south, to get married. Why is her picture here?" "Are you certain this is her?" "I'm 90% sure. But Megan, she had a small mole, right here, under the corner of her left eye," Brenda said, pointing to the portrait. "And she wore that floral dress all the time. I remember it clearly." A critical, corroborating detail. The detectives immediately reported the breakthrough to Detective Miller. Finally, after so many days of effort, the first layer of mystery had been peeled back. The victim had a name, Megan Vance. According to information from Brenda's old ledger, Megan Vance was born in 1998, and her hometown was listed as Jefferson Parish, Louisiana. Louisiana, a state in the deep south, over 1,000 miles from Ohio. The distance was so vast it was almost unbelievable. The case had officially reached a turning point. The task force's next step was clear. They had to go to Louisiana immediately to verify the information and find the victim's family. The news that they had a preliminary identification for the victim breathed new life into the entire investigation unit. From a case with no beginning and no end, they now had a name, a hometown, the first thread connecting them to the unfortunate girl's past. A special three-person team, led by Detective Miller himself, was immediately formed to travel to Louisiana. Their mission was clear: to confirm Megan Vance's identity and learn anything they could from her family. The journey of over 1,000 miles, crossing nearly half the country, was long and tiring. After more than a day of travel, the team finally arrived in Jefferson Parish. The atmosphere here was completely different from the starkness of Ohio. The southern heat, though intense, was made more bearable by the breezes carrying moisture from the countless rivers and bayous. Following the address Brenda had provided, the team found Megan Vance's home in a small hamlet. It was a simple, one-story house with a rusting tin roof, nestled in the middle of a lush, overgrown garden. In front of the house, a small, thin woman with hair more grey than black sat shelling peas. Her face was deeply lined with the marks of hardship and toil. Seeing a strange car and several well-dressed men stop at her gate, she looked up, her expression a mixture of confusion and apprehension. Detective Miller and his team got out of the car, trying to adopt the friendliest and most gentle demeanor possible. He knew that what they were about to say could be a devastating blow to this woman. "Good afternoon, Detective Miller began. "We are police officers from Ohio. Sorry to bother you. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your daughter, Megan Vance." Hearing her daughter's name, and especially the word police, the woman startled. She quickly stood up, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes filled with worry. Yes, I'm Sarah Vance, Megan's mother. Is she in some kind of trouble? Her question tugged at the officers' hearts. In her mind, the police could only be here because a child had done something wrong. No, please don't worry, Detective Miller reassured her. We just need to verify some information. Has Megan been in regular contact with the family? At this, Sarah seemed to relax, but her face fell with a distant sadness. She invited them inside. The house was sparse, with few valuables. On a plywood wall hung a memorial photo of an older man, and next to it, the only picture of Megan Vance's school photo where she had a bright, innocent smile. Please, have a seat, have some water, Sarah said, her voice melancholic. Megan's been working up north for over a year now. I haven't seen her. When she first left, she used to send money home for me through a neighbor. But about a year ago, it stopped. I'm here all by myself. Her father passed away a long time ago. I don't know how to use one of them smartphones, and the neighbor who helped me moved away, so I lost touch with her. She continued, her voice choking up. The last time she called, on my old flip phone, she told me she was getting married. Said her fiancé was from up there, a good, kind man who loved her very much. She said once they were settled, she'd come visit. I was so happy for her, thinking my girl had finally found someone to lean on. But I've been waiting and waiting, and I haven't heard from her. Every word Sarah spoke was like an invisible knife twisting in the listeners' hearts. A painful truth was slowly emerging. Megan Vance hadn't been in contact with her family, not because she was thoughtless, but because she couldn't be. The story about getting married was likely a lie, a script fabricated by her killer to cover his crime. Detective Miller took a deep breath. He knew it was time to face the truth. He carefully took 2 photographs from his briefcase. One was the facial reconstruction of the victim, the other was a photo of the floral dress. He placed them on the table, gently pushing them toward Sarah. Mrs. Vance, please, take a calm look at these. Do you recognize the person in this portrait or this dress? Sarah looked down, picking up the photo of the dress first. Her eyes narrowed, then widened. This is Megan's dress. I bought the fabric myself and sewed it for her before she left. Then, her hands trembling, she picked up the portrait. She stared at the face. Her lips began to move, her whole body shaking violently. Although a reconstruction from a skull could never be 100% accurate, a mother could never mistake the features of her own child. Those eyes, that nose, that mouth. Megan, my Megan. She whispered, her voice cracking. Why? Why does she look like this? What happened? What happened to my girl? The small house became thick with grief. Detective Miller couldn't lie any longer. He bowed his head, his own voice heavy with emotion. We are so sorry. We found human remains in Ohio, and through our investigation, we suspect that it might be Megan. No, it can't be. Sarah screamed, clutching her head. You're lying. My daughter is married. She's living happily. You've made a mistake. You must have the wrong person. She wailed, her frail body collapsing to the floor. The shock was too sudden, too immense for the poor mother. The officers rushed to help her up, trying to offer what little comfort they could. They knew no words could soothe this kind of pain. After a long while, when Sarah had calmed slightly, Detective Miller dared to speak again. To be 100% certain, we need to conduct a DNA test. We were hoping you would be willing to provide a sample for comparison. It's the only way we can know the truth for sure. Sarah sat dazed, tears still streaming down her weathered face. She no longer screamed, just sat in a terrifying silence. She understood that her last glimmer of hope was gone. The request for a DNA test was an indirect confirmation of her daughter's death. She nodded, lifeless. With her consent, the officers collected a buccal swab sample from Sarah, following proper procedure. Before leaving, Detective Miller left his phone number and promised to notify her of the results as soon as they were available. Seeing the elderly mother huddled alone in her empty house, his heart ached. A single person's crime had not just taken one life, it had destroyed the life of a mother. The team returned to Ohio immediately. Sarah's DNA sample was sent for expedited analysis at the BCI state-of-the-art lab. The days of waiting for the results were tense for the entire investigative team. Although all signs pointed to the body being Megan Vance, they needed irrefutable scientific proof to officially close the identification phase and move on to hunting the killer. A week later, the results came back. It was the final hammer blow, crushing any lingering, fragile hope. The analysis confirmed that the DNA profile of the victim and the DNA profile of Sarah Vance shared a mother-daughter relationship with a 99.999% probability. The body found in Gravel Run Field was indeed the young woman, Megan Vance, from a world away in Jefferson Parish, Louisiana. Upon receiving the results, Detective Miller did not delay. He called the sheriff's office in Jefferson Parish and asked them to go to Sarah's house to support her as he delivered the devastating news over the phone. According to his colleague in Louisiana, when Sarah heard that her daughter had truly been murdered, she didn't say a word. She simply collapsed and fainted into the arms of her neighbors. The case now had a name. One painful chapter had closed, but another, more violent one, had just begun. With the victim's identity confirmed, the task force in Ohio could now begin to unravel Megan Vance's life as a stranger in a strange land, to find the killer who had so brutally stolen her future. The investigative team in Ohio moved forward, carrying the weight of a mother's grief and a steely determination to find justice. The first and most critical line of inquiry was directed at Megan Vance's last known place of employment, the relaxation station massage parlor. This time, the detectives' visit was not a general canvass. They arrived as homicide investigators, with sharp questions and a specific target. Brenda, the owner, was shocked and horrified to learn that Megan had been murdered. She cooperated fully, providing a complete list of all employees, past and present, who worked there during Megan's tenure. Detective Miller personally interviewed Megan's former colleagues who were still working at the parlor. Through their stories, a clearer picture of Megan Vance began to emerge. She was a gentle, quiet girl, but very beautiful and charming. Unlike many others in her line of work, Megan wasn't aggressive or materialistic. She worked hard and saved every penny she could, saying she was sending it back home to her elderly mother. Because of her simple beauty and quiet nature, she was noticed and well-liked by many clients. She was a sweet kid, said a co-worker named Hannah, who had once been Megan's roommate. She rarely stayed out late. After work, she'd just go back to our room to rest. She used to tell me she was planning to work for a few more years, save up some capital, and then go back home to open a small tailor shop near her mom to take care of her. She loved her mom so much. During her time here, did she have conflicts or arguments with anyone? Detective Miller asked. Hannah thought for a moment, then shook her head. She was as harmless as a fly. If anyone gave her trouble, she'd just stay quiet to let it pass. But because she was so pretty, a lot of guys pursued her. Clients would give her big tips, ask for her number. You wouldn't believe how many. This was the information the investigators were waiting for. Within those complicated relationships, the seeds of a crime could very well be hidden. A lot of guys pursued her. Anyone specific? Anyone who was particularly close or seemed more intense than the others? Miller pressed. Hannah frowned, trying to recall. There were so many, Detective, I can't remember them all. But I do remember 3 who came around the most, giving her gifts, picking her up, that sort of thing. They seemed the most serious about her. Tell us about those 3 men, Detective Miller said, his focus absolute. Hannah began to recount. The first was a man named Nathaniel Thorne, about 35, the owner of a small lumber mill. Thorne was married with children but was a regular at the parlor, always requesting Megan and tipping her generously. He had promised to buy her a house and a car if she agreed to be his mistress, but Megan had flatly refused. The second was a young man named Trevor Kent, only 22, the son of a wealthy family from a city. Kent was a typical rich, spoiled kid who partied hard. He was infatuated with Megan's beauty and pursued her aggressively. He would often drive his luxury car to the parlor to wait for her after her shift, buying her expensive gifts. But Kent had a hot temper and a possessive streak. A few times, just for seeing Megan talking to another male client, he had flown into a jealous rage and caused a scene at the parlor. The third, and final, man was Logan Harris, about 30, a long-haul truck driver. Harris wasn't wealthy like the other 2, but he was the most persistent and seemed the most sincere. He was tall, with a gentle way of speaking. Harris usually didn't come inside the parlor but would wait for Megan outside. He didn't give her expensive gifts, just snacks or a bouquet of wildflowers. He told Megan that he genuinely cared for her and was willing to wait until she accepted him. Of the three, who did Megan seem to like the most? Detective Miller asked. At first, she turned them all down, Hannah continued. She said she didn't want to get involved in any complicated relationships, just wanted to focus on work. But you know, constant dripping wears away the stone. That truck driver, Logan, he was so persistent. Gradually, I saw Megan starting to soften. Sometimes she'd let him give her a ride home after work. A few times, I even saw her smiling while talking to him on the phone. Hannah's testimony provided the task force with its first three suspects: a complex love triangle or square involving money, youthful obsession, and sincere affection. Any one of those elements, when pushed to an extreme, could become a motive for murder. Detective Miller suspected this was very likely a crime of passion. The killer could be one of these three men, either scorned by a harsh rejection or blinded by jealousy. Warrants were immediately issued to bring Nathaniel Thorne, Trevor Kent, and Logan Harris in for questioning. The first to be interviewed was Nathaniel Thorne, the lumber mill owner. Facing the investigators, Thorne was quite calm. He admitted to knowing and pursuing Megan Vance. "Yeah, I liked her," he said frankly. "What man doesn't like a pretty girl? I promised her a few things here and there. But she said no. Said she didn't want to be a home wrecker. I thought she had a point, so after she turned me down a few times, I lost interest and gave up. It's been a long time since I've had any contact with her." "When was the last time you saw or spoke to Ms. Vance?" "Must have been almost 2 years ago. I don't remember the exact date. After that, I never went back to that place, never called or texted her." To verify Thorne's statement, detectives checked his call logs, text messages, and location data. The results showed no contact whatsoever between Thorne and Megan for the past year and a half. Statements from his wife and employees also confirmed that while Thorne had a wandering eye, he was terrified of his wife and never dared to stay out overnight. Nathaniel Thorne's alibi was solid. He was temporarily cleared as a suspect. The second person brought in was Trevor Kent, the rich kid. In contrast to Thorne's calmness, Kent was arrogant and uncooperative. "Why'd you drag me in here? I know so many girls like that. How am I supposed to remember one named Megan?" he answered dismissively. It was only when Detective Miller showed him Megan's photo and explicitly stated it was a homicide investigation that Kent's attitude changed. His face paled slightly, but he tried to maintain his tough guy facade. "Oh, her. Yeah, I remember her," Kent said. "Pretty. I chased her for a while, but she played hard to get. If I can't get her, I move on. There's plenty of fish in the sea. Why would I get hung up on one?" "You say you moved on, but we have information that you got jealous and caused trouble for Ms. Vance on multiple occasions. You even threatened that you wouldn't let her be, correct?" Kent flinched. "I was just angry at the time, just talking big. I never did anything. I admit I was pissed that she rejected me. But after that argument, I got bored and stopped going after her. I haven't seen her in about a year and a half." Similar to Thorne, investigators cross-referenced Kent's testimony. His phone data also showed no contact with Megan during the time she was missing. Kent's friends confirmed that after failing to win Megan over, he had quickly moved on to dating other girls. Although he had a volatile personality and a tendency toward aggression, Kent also had a reasonably strong alibi. Suspicion against him was significantly reduced. Finally, the last person summoned was Logan Harris, the truck driver. Harris arrived at the station with a look of deep worry and confusion. When he heard that Megan Vance had been murdered, he broke down and cried right in front of the investigators. The tears of a tough, grown man streamed down his weathered face. "Oh my God, how could this have happened?" he sobbed. "She was so gentle. Who could have been so cruel to her?" Harris's reaction was completely different from the other two. It showed a deep attachment and affection for the victim. "What was your relationship with Ms. Vance?" Detective Miller asked, his tone softening. Harris wiped his tears, his voice still trembling. We were in love. After a long time of pursuing her, she finally agreed to be my girlfriend. We were so happy together. We were even planning for me to go with her to Louisiana at the end of that year to meet her family. A critical piece of information had been revealed. Megan Vance and Logan Harris were a couple. This clarified the victim's relationship status but also made Logan Harris the #1 suspect. In crimes of passion, the closest person is often the most likely perpetrator. Logan Harris's admission of his romantic relationship with the victim tipped the scales of suspicion squarely onto him. In the small interrogation room, the air grew thick. Logan, once a key witness, was now the prime suspect. Facing Detective Miller, he continued to play the part of the grieving boyfriend. He recounted their love story in detail, from the first time he met Megan and was struck by her innocent beauty and sad eyes, to his persistent courtship that eventually melted her heart. "We were truly happy," Logan said, his eyes red-rimmed. "She told me I was the first man she had ever trusted. We dreamed of a future together, a small house where she wouldn't have to do this difficult job anymore. I promised I would take care of her and her mother back home." "So why are you no longer together? When was the last time you saw Megan, and what happened?" Detective Miller asked, his eyes never leaving Logan's face, searching for the smallest crack in his facade. Logan fell silent for a moment, as if recalling a painful memory. "The last time I saw her was one evening, around the beginning of July last year. I don't remember the exact date. My trucking schedule messes with my sense of time. We had a small argument that night." "What was the argument about?" "It was something silly, Detective. She was upset that I was always on the road and didn't have enough time for her. I was tired from a long haul. One word led to another, and she got angry and stormed back to her apartment. I thought it was just a little spat, so I didn't go after her. I figured I'd let her cool down and go over to make up the next day. And after that, I couldn't reach her anymore," Logan said, his voice filled with regret. "I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I messaged her on all the apps, but she never replied. I went to her apartment, but the door was locked. I asked her roommates, but they didn't know where she'd gone. I thought she was really mad at me and had gone back home or somewhere I couldn't find her. I was heartbroken and tormented. I never imagined that this had happened to her." Logan's story sounded plausible. A typical lover's quarrel, a girl's anger, a boy's regret. It explained Megan's sudden disappearance. But to a seasoned investigator like Detective Miller, the more perfectly plausible a story sounded, the more suspicious it became. He had a vague feeling that a much darker truth was being concealed behind those tears and that sorrowful expression. "We will verify your statement," Detective Miller said firmly. "In the meantime, you are not to leave the county." After the first interrogation, while Logan Harris was allowed to go home, a surveillance team was ordered to secretly monitor his every move. Simultaneously, another investigative unit began a quiet but crucial task, a thorough background check on Logan Harris. And just 2 days later, a shocking truth was uncovered, tearing away the sincere facade Logan had so carefully constructed. By contacting the police in Logan Harris's hometown in another county, investigators discovered a bombshell. Logan Harris was married. He had been legally married for 6 years. His wife, Jessica Harris, had been working abroad in Taiwan for the past 3 years, sending money home every month for Logan to raise their child. Their son was now 5 years old and lived with Logan and his parents. This information exploded like a bomb within the task force. The man who claimed to be a devoted lover, who had painted a rosy future with Megan Vance, was in fact a married man, a deceitful liar. The image of the simple, honest man completely shattered, replaced by the portrait of a scoundrel. It didn't stop there. As detectives dug deeper into Logan's life back home, more disgusting truths were revealed. The money his wife toiled to send back from overseas was not used to care for their child. Logan had fallen into gambling and was frequently involved with other women. He was living a life of leisure on the sweat and tears of his wife. Megan Vance was not his first victim. She was just one of many young women who had fallen into the trap of a man who looked sincere on the outside but was morally rotten to the core. Detective Miller clenched his fists. He understood now. The motive for the murder was no longer vague. It was highly likely that Megan Vance had discovered her lover's true face. She had wanted to break up, and in a heated confrontation, tragedy had struck. Logan Harris was summoned for a second time. This time, the atmosphere was not so lenient. He walked into the interrogation room, still wearing a sad expression, but he could feel the palpable tension. Detective Miller wasted no time. He placed a copy of a marriage certificate and a photo of Logan holding a young boy on the table. "Do you recognize these, Mr. Harris?" Seeing the documents, Logan's face changed dramatically. The sorrow vanished, replaced by panic and confusion. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Where did you get this?" he stammered. "You don't need to know where we got it," Detective Miller said, his voice hard. "You just need to answer, who is the woman named Jessica Harris, and who is the child in this photo? Why did you fail to mention them during our last session?" Knowing he could no longer deny it, Logan's mask finally came off. He hung his head, silent for a long moment, then began to make excuses. "My wife and I, we have no feelings for each other anymore. She's been abroad for so many years, the love has faded. We are only staying together for the child. We agreed that when she comes back, we'll get a divorce." "You said you and Megan were truly in love. Did you ever tell her the truth about your family?" I was going to tell her," Logan mumbled, "but I was afraid she'd be shocked, that she'd leave me. I truly loved her. I just needed a little more time." "Truly loved her?" Detective Miller scoffed, his smile full of irony. "You love her with the money your wife sent home, didn't you? You love her while cheating on both her and the wife who was working so hard overseas, didn't you?" Hit where it hurt, Logan became agitated. "What do you know? I admit I was wrong to hide it from Megan, but I didn't kill her. When she found out the truth, she demanded to break up. I begged her not to, but she wouldn't listen. She left. That was the last time I saw her. I don't know where she went or what she did after that." Logan stubbornly denied the crime. He admitted to being a liar but insisted he was not a murderer. But the task force no longer believed a word he said. They knew that to completely break his resistance, they needed one final, irrefutable piece of evidence. Logan Harris's cell phone had been confiscated. The experts at the BCI lab went to work. They knew that in the modern world, people can lie, but digital data doesn't. After days of persistent work, they succeeded in recovering all the deleted data from Logan's messaging apps. And what they found was a detailed script leading to Megan Vance's death. It was a series of messages exchanged in the week before Megan disappeared. The first was from Megan. She sent Logan a screenshot of his wife's social media profile, with a single line of text, "Who is this?" This was followed by a barrage of heartbroken and furious messages from her as she realized she was the other woman. "Why did you lie to me? You told me you were single. What am I to you?" "I'm sorry, Megan, I can explain. Please don't be angry, just listen to me. There's nothing left to say. You're a liar. We are done." After Megan's declaration to end the relationship, Logan's messages became increasingly desperate and frantic. He went from begging to threatening. "You can't leave me. I won't allow it. I've spent so much effort, so much money on you. You can't just walk away. If I can't have you, then no one can." The final message, sent from Logan's phone on that fateful evening, just hours before Megan vanished, was no longer a threat. It was an appointment. "Meet me one last time. We'll sort everything out. Meet me at the old spot." Detective Miller read and reread the data analysis report, his face like ice. The final curtain of mystery had been lifted. They not only had the motive, but they also had the killer's psychological progression leading up to the crime. Logan Harris was cornered by his own words. The cat and mouse game had to end. The third time Logan Harris was brought into the interrogation room, he could feel it was over. There were no more leading questions, no more psychological battles. The air in the room was as cold as a tomb, and the look in Detective Miller's eyes was no longer one of suspicion, but of the certainty of a man who held the truth. Detective Miller said nothing. He silently placed item after item on the cold steel table between them. First, the copy of Logan's marriage certificate. Next, the birth certificate of his 5-year-old son. Then, photos of Logan happily with his wife and child before she went abroad. And finally, the deadliest weapon of all, a thick, carefully stapled printout of the entire recovered chat history between him and Megan Vance. Detective Miller pushed the stack of papers towards Logan. "Read it." Logan looked down, his eyes fixed on the familiar words, the words of love, the promises, the pleas, and finally, the crazed threats he himself had typed. His hands began to shake. Each letter was like a ghost from the past, rising up to choke him. He had deleted them, thinking they were gone forever. He never imagined that technology could resurrect the evidence of his crime so vividly, so cruelly. The final wall of defense, built on lies and stubbornness, crumbled into dust. Logan looked up but didn't dare to meet the detective's gaze. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it. Finally, after a long, suffocating silence, the once tough man collapsed onto the table, his shoulders shaking. A sound of choked, shameful, and desperate sobs broke the silence. I didn't mean to. I didn't want to kill her, Logan whimpered, his voice broken. Detective Miller's expression remained cold. There was no room for pity for a murderer. Now is not the time for that. We need the truth. The whole truth. Tell us everything that happened that night. Why did you kill Megan Vance? The floodgates of confession finally opened. Through a torrent of tears, Logan Harris began to recount the tragedy he had created. The story was nothing like the sincere love he had painted. It was born from selfishness, greed, and a pathological fear of loss. Logan admitted he was initially drawn to Megan only for her beauty, but as time went on, he became genuinely attached. Megan was different from the other women he'd been with. She was gentle, sincere, and gave him a feeling of being truly loved, a feeling he hadn't had from his long-absent wife. He had waded too deep into his own swamp of lies. To win Megan's love and maintain his comfortable lifestyle, he had freely spent the money his wife had painstakingly sent home. He rented an apartment for Megan, bought her expensive things, and took her to fancy restaurants. He had invested in this relationship like a gambler, using his wife's money to buy the love of another woman. And then she found out the truth, Detective Miller said, prompting him. Yes, Logan nodded, his voice hoarse. Somehow, she found my wife's social media. She was completely devastated. She called me a liar, a monster. She wanted to break up immediately. Logan recounted how he had begged and pleaded, but to no avail. Megan's hurt and disgust had turned into an iron resolve. When pleading failed, the demon inside Logan began to stir. He wasn't just facing the loss of his lover, he was facing the loss of a massive investment. The fear of losing everything turned to rage. In his final messages, when he asked to meet Megan one last time, his intention wasn't to reconcile. He had another plan. He told Megan that if she wanted to leave, fine, but she had to pay him back for everything he had spent on her. I told her, Logan continued, that if she wanted to break up, she had to give me back $50,000. It was an insane number, an absurd demand made by a man in a panic. $50,000. It was nearly all the money his wife had sent home in over a year. On that fateful evening, they met on a deserted road near the industrial park where Logan often parked his truck to rest. Megan came not to listen to explanations, but to say her final goodbye. When she heard Logan's demand for money, she couldn't believe her ears. She was furious, screaming in his face that he was a degenerate, that he had no humanity left. She said she owed him nothing. The argument escalated. Agitated by Megan's words and obsessed with the money he was about to lose, Logan lost control. She slapped me, Logan said, his eyes staring into nothing. She said she never wanted to see my face again. She turned to walk away. At that moment, I just snapped. All the blood rushed to my head. I grabbed her. I put my hands around her neck. The room seemed to grow colder. Logan described the horrifying moment in disjointed fragments. He only remembered squeezing, hard, for a long time. He saw Megan's eyes go wide with shock and fear, then gradually turn lifeless. He only let go when her limp body collapsed at his feet. When he realized what he had done, Logan panicked. But his survival instinct and selfishness took over. Instead of calling for help or turning himself in, his first thought was to cover up his crime and recover what he believed he had lost. He went through Megan's purse. He took her cell phone, which he later smashed and threw into a river. He took the small amount of cash from her wallet. He saw a bank card. He didn't know the PIN, but he knew he could use it for credit purchases at gas stations and stores without one. In the days that followed, While pretending to be a heartbroken boyfriend searching for his lost love, this cold-blooded killer casually used his victim's bank card to buy gas, food, and other personal items until the account was frozen. And finally, the disposal of the body. Logan knew he couldn't leave her there. He loaded the body of the woman he had just murdered into his semi-truck and drove aimlessly through the night like a ghost. He thought of Gravel Run Field. It was a desolate place, near a cemetery. He figured no one would ever look there. Under the dim headlights of his truck, in the dead of night, the truck driver dug a shallow grave with a shovel he always kept in his rig. He threw Megan's body in, hastily covered it with dirt, and tried to erase any trace. He thought his crime would be buried forever under 3 feet of earth, erased by time and weeds. He never imagined that over a year later, a small crawfish, in its own journey for survival, would accidentally lead an old man to his terrible secret, exposing his horrifying crime to the light of justice. Logan Harris's confession officially closed the investigative phase of the case. All the knots had been untied, the face of the killer fully revealed. It was not some distant monster, but an ordinary-looking man who used words of love to mask a soul rotted by greed and deceit. Detective Miller looked at the man sobbing before him, feeling nothing but contempt. His and his team's work was done. Now, it was time for the law to do its part. Logan Harris's confession put a definitive end to the challenging investigation. The case of the skeleton in Gravel Run Field, once an unsolvable mystery, now had a clear perpetrator and a motive as cruel as it was disgusting. Legal proceedings moved quickly. Logan Harris was indicted on 2 felony counts, first-degree murder and robbery. But for Detective Miller and his team, the relief of solving the case was quickly overshadowed by a heavier duty, facing and sharing the pain with the victim's family. A few days later, a special vehicle quietly left the Ohio BCI Forensics Lab, beginning a long journey south. It carried the remains of Megan Vance, bringing her home to her mother's soil after more than a year of being lost in a strange land. Sarah, Megan's mother, with the support of local authorities and charitable donors, traveled to Ohio to personally receive what was left of her beloved daughter. Seeing the small, frail mother clutching the urn containing her daughter's ashes, her face beyond tears, no one present could hold back their own. Justice could be served, but a mother's loss could never be healed. Several months later, the trial of Logan Harris opened at the Red Creek County Court of Common Pleas. The case, with its savage details of a killer cloaked as a devoted lover, captured national attention. From early in the morning, hundreds of people gathered at the courthouse, not just out of curiosity, but to witness justice for a crime that had trampled on all moral decency. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension and sorrow. In the front row, Sarah sat silently, her eyes sunken and hollow, fixed on the defendant's stand. She had traveled a long way, not to bring her daughter back to life she knew that was impossible, but to look directly into the face of the man who had taken everything from her. The defendant, Logan Harris, was led in. The once ruggedly handsome truck driver was now a withered shadow. His face was gaunt, his beard unkempt, his eyes always cast to the floor, daring not to look at anyone. The prosecutor's indictment was read, each word a steely blow, exposing the defendant's entire process of deceit, exploitation, and ultimately, the brutal murder of his victim. The courtroom was silent, save for the quiet sobs from the victim's family. When the indictment mentioned the detail of Logan using Megan's bank card after he had killed her, many in the gallery couldn't stop themselves from muttering curses of disgust. During questioning, Logan Harris, head bowed, admitted to everything, just as he had confessed to the police. He was no longer defiant, no longer offered excuses. He just kept repeating one meaningless phrase, "I know what I did was wrong. I'm sorry." That late and empty apology could not soothe any pain. When the judge allowed her to speak, Sarah did not stand. She simply sat there, her voice weak but clear enough to command silence in the courtroom. "Your Honor," she said, her voice trembling, "my daughter, Megan, was a good girl. She never hurt a soul. Her father died young, and I raised her by myself. She loved me. She said she was working far away to save money to fix our house, to take care of me in my old age. I believed she was getting married. I hoped she would be happy. But instead, she was lied to and murdered by this man." She raised her head, for the first time looking directly at Logan Harris, her old eyes flashing with a fire of hatred. "I don't need your apology. Your apology can't bring my daughter back. I have only one request. I demand that the law punish this evil man with the most severe sentence possible, so that my daughter can finally rest in peace." Her words struck the conscience of everyone present like a hammer. After deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The presiding judge, in a stern voice, declared, "The actions of the defendant, Logan Harris, are exceptionally grievous, demonstrating a complete and utter depravity of morals and a loss of all humanity. The defendant not only deprived the victim of her right to live, the most fundamental and sacred of human rights, but also caused immeasurable pain to her family and outrage in our community. Such actions must be permanently removed from society." This court finds the defendant, Logan Harris, guilty of first-degree murder and robbery. The court sentences the defendant to the maximum penalty for these crimes, death. The sentence was announced. A wave of gasps and applause broke out in the courtroom. Sarah bowed her head, her shoulders shaking. The final tears of grief, and perhaps of relief that justice was done, rolled down her weary face. The trial was over. Logan Harris was led away to death row, his life of deceit ending with the forfeiture of his own. The horrifying case of Gravel Run Field would eventually fade into the past, but it will forever remain a costly lesson, a painful scar about the depravity of man when reason is clouded by greed and base desire. It showed that behind a seemingly honest, simple exterior can lie the soul of a demon, ready to trample on love and life to satisfy its own selfishness. And perhaps no one will ever forget the image that started this whole tragedy: a quiet evening in a peaceful field, an old man trapping crawfish, and one small creature that accidentally unearthed a horrifying secret, long thought to be buried forever. Sometimes, justice finds its way in the most unexpected of ways, as a reminder that no crime can ever truly be hidden from the sun.